Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in the most recent chapter of the Dragon Ball Super Manga, Vegeta finally went one-on-one with the villain Moro, in what seemed like it was going to be the final climactic fight of the arc. During this fight, Vegeta also revealed his new ultimate technique, which he attained on planet Yardrat. This technique is known as Forced Spirit Fission, an ability which allows the user to forcefully separate absorbed energy or fusion components from the target. More on that second part later. Now this technique is pretty interesting, and something different from the typical new color swapped form that we typically get. But when it comes to the actual execution of this technique in this overall chapter, I feel like it was kind of poorly handled. There were a lot of inconsistencies that appeared during this chapter alone that really started to reveal more of the cracks in this arc, and fracture a lot of the logic and goodwill that had been built up during it. Not that the writing before this was perfect by any stretch, but much of it really started to fall apart during this chapter, which seems to be a running theme with Super and its endings. The first of these begin with the villain Moro himself, when the effects of Vegeta's move began to take their toll on him in a very peculiar way. Because not only was he losing the wealth of energy that he absorbed, but for some strange reason he started to revert back to his older form, even regrowing his beard. Now honestly, this makes no sense whatsoever. Sure, Moro may have been able to restore his physical form using the energy that he acquired, but it's not like the energy itself was implied to somehow be causing him to stay in a younger form. This isn't like Cell or Boo, where you rip someone out of them and then they revert back to a stage that they had before. Moro literally used this energy to regenerate his body, so it doesn't make any sense that he would suddenly turn back into an old man and even regrow his beard out of nowhere when you take that away. That'd be like King Piccolo becoming old again after he blew up Shenron. It's a one and done process. Then there's what happened next with planet New Namek, when the energy that was taken from the Namekians and the planet returned to it and started bringing them back to life. Now remember, because they even point this out themselves in the chapter, it's literally been 2 months or more since the fight with Moro on Namek, at the end of which he absorbed so much power from the planet that it looked like it was on the verge of exploding, resembling the battleground between Goku and Frieza in Dragon Ball Z. The planet only lasted 5 minutes after Frieza hit the core with his blast. Yet somehow we're supposed to believe that New Namek just hung around there for 2 months without exploding, and now just returning its energy to it makes it perfectly fine. And then they try and hand-wave away the fact that the Namekians are able to be revived by something strong life force, which shouldn't really make that much of a difference when they were literally killed and left for dead for months. Like, wouldn't they have already been assigned to the afterlife by King Yama by now? And despite the fact that their bodies were just left out in the open, baking in the multiple suns for months, somehow they also didn't decompose because something the influence of the Dragon Balls. And honestly, I'm sorry to say it, but this is just dumb. After all, the Earth has Dragon Balls, and people clearly decompose there. Even when the Dragon Balls are active. That's the entire reason why Bulma needed to put the dead Z fighters in capsules in the original Dragon Ball, so that they didn't decompose and could have their spirits restored. Not to mention that both Universe 7 and Universe 6 have giant Super Dragon Balls that are literally omnipotent. So shouldn't the exact same rules apply to both universes where none of their dead bodies ever rot? You'd think we would have heard of this, but we didn't, because it's obviously a plot hole. I mean, I know that Toriyama doesn't really go back and read his own manga very often, but you'd think that Toyotaro would at least read some of the dialogue in between tracing the panels. And then there's what happens next with Moro, where once again, just like in Resurrection F, Vegeta is standing over his opponent, ready to obliterate him, in literally the exact same pose, when suddenly Moro is able to escape despite the fact that Vegeta is significantly faster than him, and finally put into action what he set up in the prior chapters with Android 7-3, where Moro was using him as a backup just in case something happened to him, so he could restore his powers. Unfortunately, he did this in the dumbest and most inconsistent way possible, by literally grabbing 7-3 and eating him, which somehow merged him together with the android, restoring his powers and also giving him 7-3s.
That does not make sense.
Up until now, it was clearly shown that Moro only had the ability to absorb energy by draining it with his magic. He isn't Cell or Majin Buu, so it's not like he literally takes other people's bodies and absorbs them like they do. He just drains them until there's nothing left to keep them alive. Yet all of a sudden, he's taking an android and literally shoving him down his throat and evolving.
That That does not make sense.
It seems like Toyotaro really took my words about Moro and Cell's similarity in my last manga video to heart. But did he really have to turn him into a basic uber ripoff of the guy, complete with a new form that honestly is the worst looking yet? Not to mention, how does Moro, a biological being, absorb a completely artificial one like 7-3 and fuse with him? Again, it's not like Cell, who was literally created by Dr. Gero to merge with the androids. But I guess common sense and logic don't matter here, because it is Dragon Ball Super. And it really is a shame, because up until now, I was really enjoying this arc. But this chapter was mostly bad from beginning to end. Now, I like the symbolism behind Vegeta using his new ability to bring back the Namekians. It ties into his overall story arc that they've been going for with him in this saga. But even that's undermined by some of the poor writing in this chapter, where Vegeta is once again gloating about how he's a villain, in that he's better than Goku, despite the fact that he admitted he wasn't at the end of the Buu saga. I mean, that was the entire point of his fight with Goku in the Saiyan saga, and also what we saw in the Frieza saga. Despite being born at a lower class, Goku was the greater prodigy and had more potential. You can't suddenly just say that that's not the case a bunch of arcs later. Then there's the fact that Toyotaro has Piccolo say how Goku is just fine the way he is and doesn't, quote, need to change, which I obviously disagree with. Of course, he already changed when they regressed his character at the start of Super, making him dumber and more fight-hungry, no matter how it negatively affects everyone around him. And going back to the end of Dragon Ball Z, he changes roles when he becomes Oob's master. So to now say that him not changing is a good thing, when it's contributed to the staleness of his character for years, just feels like Toyotaro fanboying over him again. And we got more than enough of that in the Future Trunks arc. But that brings us to the end of this chapter, for which the video is titled, where we may have seen the worst part of this arc yet, when despite having all of the motivation and agency on his side, and this new ultimate technique that allowed him to do even better than Ultra Instinct Goku, the second Moro took on his new form, Vegeta once again got taken out by the villain, being seemingly robbed of yet another main victory that he absolutely earned, just like in Resurrection F. Now in my last manga video, I said that if Vegeta lost, I would be angry and probably even go on a rant. But to be honest, I'm not that angry now. Because while reading the end of this chapter, I got a strong feeling that this wasn't actually the end of Vegeta's involvement in the fight. And considering the way that he lost, as well as some other information from this chapter, I'm actually expecting another big subversion to happen where Vegeta returns to the fight and perhaps defeats Moro after all. Think about it. This entire arc, Toriyama and Toyotaro have been making most of the right decisions. They seem to be aware of many of the criticisms involving Vegeta and his usage in past stories. He's gotten the most development during this story, has the strongest motivation, and the spotlight has been heavily placed on him. Not only that, but they literally put him in the exact same pose that he was in when he died in Resurrection F. This to me seems more like a clear attempt to subconsciously input the idea that Vegeta is going to be screwed over in this fight, like in Resurrection F. But actually, Toyable is building towards a surprise twist where the opposite happens. After all, it's not like Vegeta was killed or completely drained of all of his energy at the end of the fight. He was just knocked down out of his form, and the focus was conveniently shifted off of him to all the other fighters. Another big plot point that was mentioned earlier in the chapter by Goku seems like it will also play a part in the ending, when he stated that not only did Vegeta's new technique have the ability to separate absorbed energy, but also fusion components. Now, much like with the dialogue that Moro had about 7-3, this seems like a pretty clear case of Chekhov's gun, where a plot device or element is introduced that will certainly pay off later. Why would they write this specific line of dialogue and include the specific power in the technique, unless this was going to happen? As a result, I think it probably will. So what I think is going to happen is that Moro will fight against and decimate the other Z fighters, including Goku. During that fight, we might see the return of Ultra Instinct, maybe even the mastered version, after Goku is pushed to his absolute limits like he was during the Tournament of Power, and has no choice other than to release his most powerful state yet. However, now that Moro has 7-3's abilities in combination with his own, I wouldn't be surprised if he also copies Mastered Ultra Instinct. putting our heroes in an incredibly tension-filled climax just like what happened with Super Perfect Cell, where it seems like there's no way for them to overcome it. Until, of course, Vegeta intervenes in the fight once again, using his ability to separate Moro and 7-3, which allows them to be killed. I'm not so sure if Vegeta will be the one to actually get the killing blow here, but that certainly would be preferable. Now, much like in the previous chapters, there are a couple of wildcard situations that could unfold as well. One popular theory is that Maris will intervene in the fight, using a special ability to defeat Moro and essentially sacrificing himself by getting erased for his actions. Another one could be that when 7-3 was absorbed, not only did Moro get his strengths, but also his weaknesses. The biggest of these being that the powers that he takes only last for half an hour. So right when he's on the verge of winning, he could pull a Super Buu or Gotenks and have his power advantage suddenly disappear, leaving him in a vulnerable state where he can be defeated. Essentially pulling a Thanos where he supplied the means for his own defeat. Overall, I feel like the version I mentioned with Vegeta getting the win would be the best option, especially after all of the build-up. But of course, all of that waits to be seen. I know a lot of people are significantly doubting this because after all, Vegeta has constantly come up short against the villains. And trust me, I've seen every single arc that's happened so far. Multiple times, in fact. But just because something has never happened before doesn't mean it won't happen now. Dragon Ball can still make changes for the better. After all, that's what many of my videos are about. So I guess we'll all just have to wait and see. Don't mess this up, guys. So let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments. If you like this content, you can help support LSM on Patreon, a link to which is down below in the description. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications, so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. Thanks for watching and make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
It does not make sense.